Dr. Aisha Monroe felt the ER before she saw it. The fluorescent glare leaking through glass, the metallic by a disinfectant, the low animal hum of people waiting to be saved. She pushed through the sliding doors with trauma pager still buzzing against her ribs. "Ma'am, stop." The voice cut cleanly, practiced, and cold. Aisha slowed, turning just enough to see the police officer near the metal detector, his posture rigid, his eyes already decided. She adjusted her coat, instinctively reaching for the badge clipped beneath it. "I'm a physician," she said. The officer didn't move. His hand rested on his belt like punctuation. "This area is restricted." Behind her, a gurney slammed to the doors, EMTs barking vitals, blood streaking the floor in thin red commas. Aisha stepped aside to clear the path, and the officer stepped with her, blocking her body with his own. A nurse glanced over, hesitated, then looked away. Aisha felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the calculation she hated knowing so well. "Lower your voice. Slow your hands. Don't give them a reason." "My badge is right here," she said, lifting the edge of her coat. The officer's gaze never dropped. "Funny," he said lightly. "You don't look like staff." The words landed with the weight of a diagnosis you already know is terminal. Around them, the ER kept moving, machines chiming, families whispering prayers, security pretending not to see. Aisha swallowed. "You are delaying care." The officer leaned closer, breath hot with coffee and authority. His voice lowered, intimate, dangerous. "Last warning." The automatic doors slid shut behind her with a hiss, sealing the room, and then his hand reached for her arm. Dr. Aisha Monroe pushed through the sliding glass doors of Mercy Gate ER as sirens bled into the night. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked asphalt. Monitors chimed, gurneys rattled, and a security guard's radio hissed like a warning she could not yet read. She had been called in late. Again, a trauma surge from a freeway pileup. Aisha wore scrubs on her long coat, hair pulled tight, badge clipped but half hidden by fabric. She walked fast, had already mapping beds and blood types. "Ma'am, stop." The voice cracked across the lobby. "White male practice authority." Officer Daniel Price stood near the metal detector, hand resting on his belt, eyes narrowed at her coat. He didn't look at her badge. "I'm a doctor," Aisha said, already moving. "Step back," Price said. "This area is restricted." She stopped. Around them, families hovered, nurses flowed, the ER breathing in chaos. Aisha felt heat rise in her face, the familiar calculation. "Be calm. Be clear." "My badge," she said, lifting the edge of her coat. Price didn't lean closer. "I asked you to step back." A nurse glanced over, then away. The guard pretended to adjust a wand. The radio hissed again. "I'm on call," Aisha said. "Patients are waiting." Price's mouth tightened. "Funny, you don't look like staff." The words landed heavy, old, sharp. Aisha inhaled. "Call the charge nurse," she said, "or the attending." Price's hand closed around his cuffs. "Or you can cooperate." A stretcher burst through the doors. EMTs shouting numbers. Blood streaked the floor. Aisha moved instinctively, stepping aside to clear the path. Price blocked her. "I said stop." Silence pooled. A mother cried somewhere. A camera phone lifted, then lowered. Aisha felt the weight of every hallway she built, every hospital she had opened, pressed behind her ribs. She kept her voice even. "You are delaying care." Price leaned in, low enough that only she could hear. "Last warning." The sirens outside cut off. The doors slid shut. Price reached for her arm.
Aisha's arm tingled where Officer Price had grabbed it, a cold line of indignation running from her shoulder to her fingers. She swallowed and followed the charge nurse, Carla, through the fluorescent maze of the ER, every will squeak and monitor beep echoing louder than usual. "You okay, Doc?" Carla asked quietly, glancing at Aisha with a hesitant smile. "I'm fine," Aisha said, but the lie felt brittle. She flexed her fingers, feeling the pulse of tension in her chest. Just Try to keep him out of patient areas. Carla nodded, her eyes flicking toward the lobby. Hospital admin is on the phone. Let them talk. Aisha, cut in. I have patience. They passed a gurney carrying a teenage boy with a shattered leg, blood oozing through a torn sleeve. Aisha's hands moved on instinct, feeling the familiar surge of control when she placed her stethoscope on his chest and heard the faint irregular beat. Vitals are stable, she said to the resident, a young man with eyes wide behind glasses. Call radiology. Keep the morphine ready. He nodded, fumbling with a clipboard. Yes, ma'am. Carla hesitated beside her. You know, Price is filing an incident report. They might put on your record. Aisha's head jerked. On my record? Her voice snapped, not just anger but disbelief. I'm on call. I was in the ER treating patients. What record? They said you resisted authority, Carla murmured. He's claiming you were disruptive. Aisha's jaw tightened. She could feel the air thicken around them, the weight of hospital administrators suddenly more cautious than her own patients. She moved to the next patient, tried to ignore the tremor of injustice. Minutes passed in a blur of monitors, muffled cries, and the hiss of gurneys rolling over tile. A mother clutched her child's arm, eyes wide and worried. Aisha knelt beside them, offering what comfort she could, though the shadow of Price's hand lingered like a bruise. Dr. Monroe, a voice said. It was Kevin, the hospital lawyer she reluctantly learned to tolerate. Administration wants you in the conference room. Now. Aisha shook her head. I have trauma cases. I can't. You can't ignore this, Kevin said firmly. They want statements, paperwork. They're already drafting narratives. Trust me, you don't want them writing your story. She followed, keeping her steps measured. Every corridor she passed seemed narrower than before, as if the building itself were closing in. Inside the small, sterile conference room, fluorescent light bounced off pale gray walls. A round table held files, a recorder, and a half-empty pitcher of water. Two administrators waited, neutral smiles pinned like armor. Dr. Monroe, thank you for coming, one said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. We need to discuss the incident in the ER. Yes, Aisha said, sitting, though every muscle tensed. I was called to trauma. There was no disruption except the one officer prevented me from treating patients. The administrator's pen hovered over a blank form. Officer Price reports that you resisted his instructions. Aisha's laugh was sharp and dry. Resisted his instructions? I rescued a patient from losing his leg. I did not resist anything except his attempt to block life-saving care. Another administrator chimed in, softer, almost apologetic. We understand your frustration, but legally, protocol says that law enforcement has certain authority in hospital zones. We just need a clear report. Aisha closed her eyes briefly. Authority. The word grated against her like sandpaper. Authority that could override expertise, that could block her from saving lives, that could reduce years of training and leadership to a footnote of alleged insubordination. I'm not here to argue semantics, she said slowly. I'm here to treat patients. If this conversation is about protecting them, I'm all in. If it's about protecting someone else's ego, I'm out. The room grew quiet. One administrator jotted notes, lips pursed. The other's hand fidgeted with a pen. Kevin leaned slightly forward. Dr. Monroe, I suggest documenting your side, but keep it factual. Emotional language can hurt your position. Factual, as if the truth itself needed translation. Minutes stretched. Aisha recounted the events with precision. The doors, the gurney, the officer's words, the interruption of care. The administrators nodded at intervals, typing, recording, pretending neutrality. Afterward, she was dismissed and returned to patients. Carla waited by the door. You handled that beautifully, she whispered. Beautifully? Aisha's voice trembled slightly. I was humiliated, harassed, and yes, almost physically attacked. How is that beautiful? Carla shrugged. You made it through without yelling. Without, I don't know, burning the room down. Aisha wanted to say something sharp, something bitter. Instead, She walked to the next room, her coat brushing the wall. She found herself face to face with an elderly man whose breathing rattled like old pipes. His wife clutched his hand, eyes wide. "He's fading," she whispered. Aisha set the stethoscope. "Not if I can help it," she said. Her voice steadied her, even as her mind replayed Price's smirk, his words, the way the nurse had looked away. By mid-afternoon, a visitor's smartphone video of the ER confrontation had gone online. The clip was short. Price stepping into Aisha's path, the tense words, her badge barely visible, but it spread fast. Comments varied. Support, disbelief, gasps at the casual authority wielded against a black doctor. Aisha ignored it. Patience didn't wait. Trauma didn't pause. Yet, somewhere under the cadence of beeping machines and ventilators, a hum of anxiety settled over the hospital like an invisible fog. Carla approached again. "People are talking. You might want to prepare for calls from the media." "I don't do media," Aisha said. "I treat patients. I save lives. That's my story." Carla hesitated, then touched her arm lightly. "Still, they're going to see you anyway. Someone has to. And when they do, they'll be looking at you differently, not just as a doctor." Aisha exhaled sharply, staring at a monitor tracking a young boy's vitals. "They already are," she murmured, almost to herself. The line between hospital and courtroom, between healer and accused, had begun to blur. Every step she took, every patient she treated, carried the invisible weight of authority misused, power unchecked, and prejudice waiting to pounce. And as she moved toward the next trauma bay, her pager buzzing urgently, Aisha knew one thing. She had survived the first assault, but the war was just beginning. Aisha paused outside the trauma bay, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, catching in her tired eyes. She had seen 1,000 emergencies, but nothing felt ordinary today. Officer Price's words echoed inside her head like a slow drumbeat. "You don't look like staff." She remembered the first hospital she'd walked into as a medical student. The same sterile scent, the same rigid routines, but then the subtle lines, the small dismissals, the raised eyebrows whenever she introduced herself. She had been young, hopeful, full of energy, and people had told her she could change the world. But the world had rules for people like her, rules she had learned to read like Braille. Caution here, silence there, always measured. Now, decades later, Aisha wasn't just a doctor. She was the founder and CEO of Mercygate, a chain of hospitals spanning 5 states. She had built it quietly, meticulously, one clinic at a time, one merger at a time, one battle with bureaucracy after another. Few knew she ran the entire system. Fewer still knew how hard she had fought to protect her staff from the same systemic biases that had once blocked her path. Her reverie broke when a resident she'd been training, Tyler, stepped into the hallway. "Dr. Monroe, the patient's stable, but the imaging team is delayed. They saw the video online." Aisha's eyebrows rose. "The video?" He hesitated. "The confrontation with Officer Price. Some visitor recorded it. It's circulating online." Aisha's jaw tightened. Every step she had taken in the ER, every careful move, now played for the world to judge. And yet, she didn't feel fear. Not yet. She felt the old, familiar surge of resolve that had driven her to found Mercygate in the first place. "Let's not let it distract us," she said, moving toward the imaging area. "We have a job to do. Lives don't wait for public opinion." But inside, a quiet, simmering calculation began. Price's words had been deliberate, cutting, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. He had no idea that the hands trying to help the patients in this ER were also the hands that controlled the largest private hospital system in the region. A soft knock drew her attention. Carla peeked in, her expression tight. "Doctor, board members just called. They want to discuss the incident. Apparently, there's concern about liability." Aisha exhaled slowly, letting the tension in her shoulders settle into purpose. "I'll go," she said, "but only to state facts. No apologies for doing my job." The boardroom was quieter than the ER. Pale walls, long table, stiff chairs. Board members sat like chess pieces, eyes calculating, lips pursed. Aisha entered, not flinching at the scrutiny. She had faced this gaze countless times, judges, investors, regulators. But today it felt personal, tinged with the weight of public assumption. One member, a middle-aged man with a tie that screamed authority, spoke first. "Dr. Monroe, thank you for coming. Officer Price filed a report stating you were uncooperative in the ER and disruptive." Aisha's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Disruptive? I treated a patient in trauma. You call that disruptive?" Another board member, younger and more cautious, raised a hand. "Procedures are protocols, Dr. Monroe. We must follow chain of command rules." Officer Price was wrong. Aisha cut in, steady but sharp. "I am a physician on call. Patients were at risk. That is the reality. There is no protocol that allows interference with care." A tense silence filled the room. She could see the mental calculations. Who would side with her? Who would worry about public perception? Who would prioritize protecting the hospital's image over truth? Finally, one woman spoke, soft but firm. "We understand, Dr. Monroe, but the law enforcement officer's report is part of the official record. There may be implications." Aisha's hands tightened on the edge of the table. "Implications for me? Or implications for the patients whose care you just allowed to be questioned?" Her voice rose slightly, though she controlled it. "I want clarity. I want truth. And I want protocols reviewed so that no doctor, no nurse, no staff member has to experience this again." Kevin, the hospital lawyer, cleared his throat. "Perhaps a formal investigation would be best," he said, careful, measured. "It will allow all sides to present evidence." Aisha's gaze flicked to the floor, then back at the board. "Fine, but let me be clear. I am not concerned with office politics. I am concerned with life and death. My staff, my patients, and my responsibility as the system's leader outweigh any concern about public opinion or bureaucracy." The board members shifted in their chairs, some nodding, some scribbling notes. The discussion moved into procedural language, liability, risk mitigation, and media strategy. Aisha let it wash over her, tuning it like static. She had built systems to withstand this. Compliance officers, PR teams, legal counsel. But she would not allow the core mission, the care, the humanity, to be compromised. Later, alone in the hallway, Aisha watched the hustle of nurses, techs, and doctors. The ER moved like a living organism. Breaths, heartbeats, monitors, the shuffle of shoes. Every life mattered here. Every microsecond counted. And yet, a shadow had passed. A single officer's bias, amplified by silence and protocol. Her phone buzzed. A text from a friend in media. Videos gone viral. Calls coming in. She typed back a single word. Not yet. She wasn't ready to be in the spotlight. Not yet. The focus had to remain on the patients. But she knew, as she traced her fingers along the wall's cold surface, that silence was a luxury she could not afford forever. Price had shown his hand. And she had the cards, too, though the world did not yet know it. A nurse approached with a new patient, a child with lacerations and a high fever. Aisha knelt, gently palpating the wound. "Okay," she murmured. "Let's keep you stable. I need you to breathe easy." Her hands moved deftly, precise, confident. The child's small eyes looked up at her with trust. Carla watched from the corner. "You handle trauma like nobody else," she said softly. Aisha smiled faintly, though her mind remained focused. "I've had to," she said. "From the first clinic I opened to the hospitals I run now, you learn quickly. And you learn that sometimes you're fighting more than disease. You're fighting assumptions, bias, and fear." A hum of monitors, the distant blare of sirens, and a low murmur of concerned families filled the ER. Aisha straightened, feeling the invisible weight of leadership settle onto her shoulders. She had faced obstacles before, society, bureaucracy, even subtle prejudice. But this was different. Officer Price was a reminder of the power imbalance that could, in a single moment, overshadow decades of work. Yet she was not afraid. Not yet. As she moved to the next patient, she allowed herself a brief thought. They think they know the chain of command. They don't. They don't know who built it. Somewhere, In the glare of overhead lights and the echo of hurried footsteps, a strategy began forming. The confrontation with Price had been only the first move, and for the first time that day, a flicker of satisfaction appeared in her chest. She knew the game now, and she intended to play it fully. Her pager buzzed again. Trauma alert. Another patient in critical condition. She inhaled deeply, feeling the surge of adrenaline she had always relied on. Lives depended on her. Aisha returned to the ER, but the energy she normally carried felt fractured, like the fluorescent lights were flickering inside her chest. Patients still needed her, machines still beeped, and nurses still moved with precision. But the shadow of Officer Price lingered in every corner. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the hospital's compliance office. Internal review initiated. Please schedule a meeting. She stared at the screen, exhaling slowly. The phrase internal review sounded bureaucratic sterile, but she knew what it meant. A shift from right to wrong, from protection to scrutiny, all aimed at her. Carlo approached. They want statements from all the staff who witnessed the ER incident. They're framing it as a disruption issue. It's frustrating. Frustrating was mild. Humiliating, infuriating, exhausting. Any of those could cover it. Let them take statements. Aisha said evenly. Make sure they're factual. No embellishment. No protecting the officer at the expense of truth. A nurse, young and nervous, pulled her aside. Dr. Monroe. People are scared to speak up. They don't want to cross him. Or the system. Aisha's eyes narrowed. System? They say the police, admin, media. They're all connected somehow. Some staff are afraid of retaliation. Some, they think the hospital will side with him automatically. Her chest tightened. Fear had 1,000 faces. The officer's authority, administration's caution, the media's scrutiny, even her own colleagues' hesitation. She had spent years building Mercygate to shield staff from exactly this. And yet, here it was again. Power misused, silencing those who should have spoken. Kevin appeared at her side, files in hand. Dr. Monroe, they want written statements. Expect questions about behavior, attitude, cooperation. They've already framed the narrative to some extent. Officer Price's allies. Aisha's jaw clenched. Allies, she echoed, voice low. He's wrong. I treated patients. I was on call. That's the narrative. Yes, Kevin said carefully. But the review team will likely frame it differently. They're worried about liability and optics, not truth. She pinched the bridge of her nose. She had anticipated bureaucracy, but not betrayal hidden behind it, not the slow erosion of authority she wielded in her hospitals, undermined by fear of a single officer's claim. The first review meeting was in a small conference room, white walls, unflinching lights. A panel of administrators sat across from her, clipboards and laptops ready. Their eyes were neutral, but Aisha could feel the calculations behind them. Self-preservation, legal liability, reputation. Dr. Monroe, the head of compliance, said, "Thank you for attending. We need to understand the sequence of events in the ER and any contributing factors. Officer Price has reported that you were uncooperative and disruptive." Aisha's hands rested lightly on the table, the skin cold beneath her palms. Disruptive? I intervened in trauma. I prevented a patient from deterioration. That is not disruption. That is care. And it is my professional responsibility. A man with a pen scribbling on a pad raised an eyebrow. We understand, but staff reports suggest tension, elevated voices, disagreement. Can you describe your interactions objectively? Aisha met his gaze. Steady. Objective. I followed hospital procedure. I treated patients. Officer Price interfered with patient care. Staff hesitated, unsure who to follow. That is the fact. Anything beyond that is interpretation, speculation, or bias. There was a pause. The word bias hung in the room like smoke. Another administrator said, "Dr. Monroe, it's important to note that law enforcement officers have authority in hospital zones. Disruption can compromise safety. We need to consider whether your actions escalated tension." Aisha's chest tightened. Escalated tension? Officer Price escalated tension by preventing a doctor from reaching a patient in critical condition. Authority misused is not my responsibility. Kevin nudged her subtly, a reminder to remain calm. But Aisha felt the heat of injustice surge. Every phrase, every polite nod, every suggestion of escalation was an attempt to rewrite reality. The panel asked for more statements, citing conflicting accounts, emphasizing risk mitigation, protocol adherence, and staff morale. Each phrase hit like a chisel against stone, a subtle shaping of blame away from the officer and toward her. She kept her voice calm but firm. I am here to provide care, not to debate interpretations. Staff hesitated because they were unsure whom to follow. I acted according to training, according to responsibility. Any framing that paints me as a disruptor is incorrect and misleading. A woman at the edge of the table scribbled notes. We appreciate your perspective, Dr. Monroe, but in any internal review we must balance perspectives. Aisha leaned forward slightly. Balance perspectives? When a patient's life is at stake, truth is balance. Misrepresenting facts under the guise of neutrality is dangerous. It harms patients, staff, and the institution. Silence filled the room for a heartbeat before they moved on to more procedural questions, asking her to submit a written statement and participate in interviews with witnesses. Aisha agreed, knowing full well the narrative could already be shaped before her words even reached paper. Afterward, she walked through the ER again, past gurneys and monitors, past exhausted nurses and concerned families. She stopped at a corner where a young tech hesitated. Dr. Monroe, he whispered, do you think he's going to get away with it? Aisha crouched slightly, making herself eye level with him. No, she said firmly, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. It doesn't mean the system will protect truth by default. Sometimes we have to make sure it does. That's why I built this hospital chain, to protect staff, patients, and the mission. But even I could be challenged. The tech nodded, understanding not just the words but the weight behind them. Back in her office, Aisha sat at her desk, reviewing patient charts while half an ear stayed tuned to the ER. The review process had started quietly, insidiously. Every email, every phone call, every interview request carried the subtle threat of institutional preference over fairness. She could already see the patterns forming. Minimize officer misconduct, emphasize her tone or attitude, frame hesitation as defiance. Her phone buzzed again, a message from a board member. Please cooperate fully with internal review. It's for the hospital's protection. Aisha stared at the words. Protection, not justice, not truth. Protection for the institution, for the officer, for optics. Never for patients, never for staff, never for her. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She could have walked away. She could have let bureaucracy run its course. But this was not about convenience. It was about principle, about showing that authority misuse could be challenged. She picked up a pen and began drafting her statement, carefully, meticulously. Facts only, no embellishment. Every detail corroborated, every action accounted for. She paused only once to look out the window at the city skyline, gray and rain-streaked, reflecting the uncertainty below. Aisha thought of every hospital she had built, every staff member she had mentored, every life she had saved. She thought of Officer Price and the power he assumed he had over her, over the ER, over the narrative. She would not let him, or the system he relied on, define her story. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the hospital, she began planning the next move, because the review was only the first skirmish. The real reckoning, the exposure, truth, the restoration of justice was still to come. Every detail mattered. Every word she wrote mattered. And Aisha Monroe, founder and CEO, doctor, and witness to systemic failure, would make sure the record reflected reality, not convenience. Her pager buzzed again. A critical patient. Lives waited. Battles could pause. But they could not stop. And Aisha Monroe never paused for injustice. Not when she could act. Aisha stood outside the glass doors of the corporate boardroom, the polished handles cold against her palms. The chatter inside was muffled, low, board members discussing risk, liability, optics. She exhaled slowly. Every day, Every decision, every hospital she'd built had led to this moment. And yet, she waited, letting the silence settle like a storm cloud before the lightning struck. When she entered, the room went still. Middle-aged men in tailored suits shifted in their seats, papers rustling nervously. Women on the board avoided eye contact, pens hovering midair. She walked ahead of the table, calm, steady, each footstep echoing against marble floors. Dr. Monroe, the board chair said, voice tight, almost faltering, "Please have a seat." She ignored the invitation. "Before we start," she said, letting her words hang, deliberate, poised, "I think it's important for everyone here to understand exactly who is in this room." She paused, letting eyes track her movement. "I am not just a staff physician on call at the Mercygate ER you've all visited. I am the founder and CEO of Mercygate Hospital Systems, the entire network. Every hospital, clinic, and outpatient facility you see across 5 states. I built it, I run it, and I am accountable to every patient and every staff member under the system." Silence hit the room like a hammer. Papers rustled, pens dropped. One board member leaned forward, mouth slightly open. "You're the founder?" "Yes," Aisha said. Her voice was steady but carried the weight of authority, tempered by fury that had been simmering for weeks. "Every protocol, every staffing decision, every policy my responsibility, and I will not allow a single officer's prejudice to undermine the care we provide or the staff we protect." The room vibrated with the shock of revelation. A junior administrator whispered to a colleague. One older man simply leaned back, exhaling audibly, as if he just swallowed something bitter. "You understand," Aisha continued, "that Officer Price's report has already begun to circulate internally and externally. It misrepresents the facts, misframes a narrative, and threatens the integrity of our hospitals." The board chair coughed, recovering first. "Dr. Monroe, we weren't aware. I mean, of course we value your leadership, but this is a formal review. Standard procedures." "Standard procedures," Aisha interrupted, voice crisp, "are meaningless if they shield misconduct, if they silence staff, if they protect bias over patients. I have tolerated enough bureaucracy. I have tolerated enough fear. And now, the truth is finally clear. I am in charge here, and I will ensure that fairness is upheld." A murmur rippled through the room. One man cleared his throat. "But, Dr. Monroe, we must consider liability, public perception, media scrutiny. Officer Price." "Officer Price," she said slowly, cutting to the hesitation like a scalpel, "is wrong. He interfered with patient care. That is not subjective. That is a fact. And no liability shield can erase the reality of his actions." Her words struck deep. The board members shuffled, some nodding cautiously, others biting their lips. Kevin, the hospital lawyer, watched in the corner, expression unreadable. He had warned her that revealing her identity would shift the power dynamic. But even he could not predict how rapidly the room would pivot. Aisha's gaze swept across the table. "I will cooperate with the review," she continued, "but it will be factual. Every staff member will give their account. Every patient interaction will be documented. The narrative that paints me as a disruptor ends now." One woman, a board member known for her cautious diplomacy, finally spoke. "Dr. Monroe, this revelation changes things. We may need to adjust the review." "Yes," Aisha said. "Adjust it so it reflects reality, not bias." Her tone was not asking, it was directing. She had built these hospitals from scratch. She knew the law, the procedures, the politics. And now, she was using all of it. A phone buzzed on the table. The chair picked it up, eyes widening as he read the screen. There's media coverage now," someone posted. "I expected as much," Aisha said, voice steady. "Control it, or we'll control you." Another board member, nervously flipping through papers, whispered, We need to consider staff morale. There's tension." Aisha leaned forward, voice low, sharp. "Staff morale is built on trust, not fear. Tolerance for prejudice is not morale. Silence in the face of bias is not morality. If you want the hospital to thrive, protect the people who make it possible. not the officers who think rules exempt them from accountability. Kevin gave her a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement that she had just shifted the narrative entirely. The room, once a panel of authority over her, now felt like a room she commanded. The board chair swallowed hard. Dr. Monroe, we appreciate your clarification. Clearly, we will proceed with the review in a manner consistent with facts. Facts, yes, she said. Not speculation. Not fear. Not loyalty to someone who abused authority. She paused. And let me be clear, any attempt to silence or misrepresent my staff will be addressed. Publicly, legally, and administratively. This is not negotiation. It is accountability. A junior board member's hand trembled slightly as she took notes. The room felt like it had shifted on its axis. For the first time, everyone realized that the game they thought they controlled had a new player, one who had built the board itself. Aisha straightened, letting the weight of her presence fill the room. I am done being underestimated, she said. I am done being interrupted, and I will not allow my staff, my patients, or my hospitals to be at the mercy of unchecked prejudice. The chair coughed again, nodding rapidly. Yes, Dr. Monroe. Understood. Aisha allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. Her voice softened slightly. Good. Now let's ensure that this review reflects truth, that our staff are protected, and that patients are never endangered by bias again. As she left the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor, she felt a shift in energy behind her. Shock, apprehension, and suddenly respect. Not admiration, but recognition. That recognition would matter. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city glistened, reflective and electric under the streetlights. Her phone buzzed again, calls from reporters already trying to piece together the ER incident. She ignored them. Lives in her hospitals came first. Media, boards, officers, they all came after, but inside, a quiet satisfaction settled. Officer Price had underestimated her. The board had underestimated her. The system had underestimated her. And now they knew the chain of command. They knew the power. They knew the consequences of misjudging a black woman who had built an empire quietly, meticulously, and with absolute precision. Aisha Monroe didn't pause. She returned to the ER. Another trauma alert. Another life hanging in the balance. Authority, she thought, can be wielded by many, but responsibility, true responsibility, belongs to those who have earned it. And she had. By the next morning, the ER was buzzing with a strange, electric tension. News crews hadn't arrived yet, but the hospital staff felt the tremor of anticipation, whispers of viral videos and social media posts traveling faster than any trauma alert. Aisha moved the hallways with practiced precision, scanning monitors, checking four lines, and offering calm words to patients. Her own thoughts, however, were occupied by the knowledge that the officer who had humiliated her yesterday could no longer hide behind protocol. Carla caught up with her near the central nurses' station. Dr. Monroe, the video is everywhere. Staff are talking. Some of them are scared, some angry. You might have to make a statement. I will, Aisha said, adjusting her coat, but only when the facts are clear. Emotion doesn't help anyone here. She paused, observing the ER. A young boy's respirator whirred. A mother clutched her hand. An elderly man trembled on a gurney. Their lives demanded attention first. Media, bureaucracy, officers, they came second. By mid-morning, her phone rang. Kevin's name flashed. They've obtained the body cam footage, he said, voice clipped. The board wants to release it publicly. We need to plan the messaging before the press explodes. Aisha's jaw tightened. Release the facts. Show the truth. No spin. No apologies for being right. Yes, Kevin said. And the board agrees. They want Officer Price suspended pending investigation. His allies are furious, but the tide is turning. She hung up and walked to the staff lounge. A small group of nurses gathered, hesitant. Dr. Monroe, one whispered, We're sorry we didn't speak up yesterday. Aisha shook her head. You did speak up. Every patient you cared for, every decision you made, every step you took under pressure. That is enough. But now we must ensure the truth reaches beyond this ER. Systemic abuse doesn't stop with one silent witness. It ends when we all speak. A tech stepped forward. The footage, people are already reacting online. Comments, shares, it's huge. Aisha nodded, expression firm. Good. Let the world see. Let it see that authority can be misused. Let it see what happens when bias is unchecked. But also, let it see how we respond. Professionally, decisively, without fear. Later, in the boardroom, the footage played on a large monitor. Officer Price's posture, the way he blocked her path, his dismissive words, all clear, undeniable. Board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing the severity of what they had previously underestimated. A senior administrator muttered, We can't ignore this. Public exposure, the legal implications. Exactly, Aisha said, her voice calm, cutting through the room's tension. We act according to truth, not convenience. Every staff member who was hesitant yesterday will now see that misconduct has consequences. Every patient will see that care comes first. That is the public trust we maintain. Kevin leaned forward, quietly. They've already received calls from news outlets. Some reporters want statements directly from you. Aisha considered. The spotlight was not her preference, but the responsibility was unavoidable. Schedule a press briefing, she said. Facts only. My staff, my patients, and the sequence of events. No embellishment. No finger-pointing beyond verified misconduct. Minutes later, cameras arrived in the hospital lobby. Lights buzzed, microphones extended. Reporters murmured questions. Aisha stood calmly, her coat tidy, badge visible. Her voice projected authority without arrogance. Every syllable measured. I am Dr. Aisha Monroe, she began. I am physician on call at Mercygate Hospital ER, and I am the founder and CEO of Mercygate Hospital Systems. Yesterday, a law enforcement officer interfered with patient care. This is unacceptable. Our hospitals operate on trust, expertise, and professionalism. Misconduct, bias, and obstruction of care will not be tolerated. Questions volleyed quickly, rapid and sharp. Was this racial profiling? What steps are you taking? Will Officer Price face consequences? Yes, Aisha said firmly. We are addressing misconduct through internal review, legal channels, and administrative action. Staff safety and patient care are our priorities. Transparency is non-negotiable. This exposure is not about embarrassment. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring the system serves the patients, not prejudice. The reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and a palpable tension filled the room. In that moment, Aisha felt the weight of her authority, her responsibility, and the expectations of the public press against her shoulders. But she did not falter. Later, Kevin approached quietly. The footage in your statement, it's framing the story now. The narrative has shifted. The public sees misconduct, not you being accused. Aisha exhaled slowly. Good. That was the goal. But exposure alone isn't enough. The system has to respond. By afternoon, the hospital received an official letter. Officer Price was suspended pending further investigation. Internal channels, legal counsel, and compliance officers began reviewing his past complaints, prior incidents, and patterns. Aisha walked through the ER, noticing subtle changes. Nurses and residents glanced at her with a new respect, not fear. Staff who had hesitated yesterday now spoke up confidently, sharing observations, documenting events, and supporting one another. Carla fell into step beside her. People are relieved. They feel safer, I think, and they trust the system more. Good, Aisha said, but relief is temporary. We must ensure procedures protect staff every day, every shift, not just after viral footage or public scrutiny. She stopped by a gurney where a young girl rested, sedated, with her mother holding her hand. Aisha checked the four, reassured them, and reminded herself why the fight mattered. Justice for herself was one thing. Justice for patients, staff, and the system was another, and far more important. Later that evening, Aisha reviewed social media coverage and news updates. Comments ranged from supportive to incredulous, some angry, some reflective. Across platforms, the story of bias and obstruction in the ER resonated. Lives had been impacted. Accountability had begun. Aisha sat back, feeling both exhaustion and resolve. Exposure had shifted the balance. Officer Price could no longer rely on silence, privilege, or bureaucracy. But she also knew that public attention was fleeting and that the battle for systemic change required more than headlines. Her phone buzzed again. Another call from a journalist. Another from hospital administration. Another patient alert. She ignored them all for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle. Finally, she whispered to herself, quiet, unshakable, "Truth matters. Consequences matter. Lives matter." She stood, straightening her coat. Another trauma alert had come through. Another patient. Another chance to act decisively. And yet, somewhere in the background, a plan for full accountability and reform had begun to take shape. The exposure was only the beginning. The system had seen the truth. Now it had to respond. And Aisha Monroe would ensure it did. The morning after the footage went public, the ER felt smaller, quieter, as if the hospital itself was catching its breath. But Aisha didn't. Her muscles were taut, her mind spinning with the consequences that exposure had unleashed. Lives had been saved, authority challenged, and bias exposed. But the personal toll was real, heavy, and inescapable. Carla found her by the central nurse's station, coffee in hand. "You okay?" she asked, hesitating. Aisha accepted the cup, gripping it tightly. The warmth seeped into her palms, but did little for the chill in her chest. "I'm fine," she said. "Physically. Emotionally," she paused, letting the words trail off. "How do you measure emotional exhaustion in an ER that never stops?" A young resident, Tyler, approached cautiously. "Dr. Monroe, I just want to say thank you for yesterday, for standing up. Everyone, well, most people, are inspired, but some, they're still resentful. Shocked, I guess." Aisha nodded slowly. "That's the cost," she said quietly. "You can change a system, expose wrongdoing, force accountability, but it doesn't come without consequences." Tyler frowned. "Consequences?" "Yes," Aisha said, voice low but firm. "Public scrutiny, board politics, legal pressure, fatigue. Even support has its weight. People will argue, criticize, and second-guess your every move. You can be right and still pay for it." Carla glanced at her, concern in her eyes. "You've always handled pressure, but this is different. People are watching. Not just the hospital. Not just the public. Social media coverage, it's everywhere." Aisha stared out the ER window, watching rain glisten off the street. She remembered all the microaggressions, the subtle dismissals, the countless times she'd been underestimated. Every exposure of bias, every correction of injustice, had come with personal cost. But the stakes were higher now. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from reporters, board members, and legal advisors stacked on top of patient alerts. Each ring pulled her attention in a new direction, 1,000 demands pressing on her simultaneously. In the break room, she finally sat down. Kevin joined, quietly sliding a folder across the table. "Dr. Monroe, the legal team has reviewed Officer Price's file. They're recommending charges and formal termination. The board supports this now." Public exposure forced their hand. Aisha exhaled, letting the first small relief settle in. "Good," she said. "But—" She trailed off, looking at the folder. The legal win was necessary, but not sufficient. Justice, she knew, was more than a headline. Kevin hesitated. "There's backlash. Media scrutiny is intense. Some community leaders are questioning your leadership style, saying the exposure was theatrical. Some of your board members, they're uneasy." Aisha's jaw tightened. "Of course they are. They see the results of bias being exposed, and they're uncomfortable. The truth makes people uncomfortable. Always has." Carla joined them, glancing at the folder. "Dr. Monroe, some staff are afraid to come forward with concerns. They're worried about retaliation. Even though the officer suspended the system, some people still fear repercussions." Aisha nodded. That's why this work isn't just about removing one officer. It's about changing the culture, protecting staff, setting clear accountability, and ensuring no one fears speaking up again. That's the real cost. You fight for justice, but the weight never fully lifts. Later that day, Aisha walked through the ER, checking on patients. A young woman recovering from surgery paused, noticing the tension behind Aisha's steady demeanor. "Doctor, are you okay?" Aisha gave a small, reassuring smile. "I'm okay, but thank you for asking." The woman smiled faintly, her trust in the system palpable. Aisha realized that even when battles were fought and won, the personal price remained. She carried it so others could feel safe. Her office felt like a quiet refuge, though even there, the phone rang constantly. She picked it up to hear board members' anxious voices, reporters' sharp questions, and legal counsel weighing each word. Every conversation, even victory, was a negotiation of tension, perception, and consequence. Kevin leaned against her desk. "Dr. Monroe, you've done what most wouldn't, but the personal toll, you've taken a hit. Emotional exhaustion, public scrutiny, pressure from staff, even friction with the board. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Aisha closed her eyes briefly. "Prepared," she echoed. "No, but I am committed. I've built this system for moments like this, for people like those patients out there. I can't let fear, fatigue, or criticism stop me. Being right is not enough. I have to act responsibly, consistently, and visibly. That's the cost." Even as she spoke, she felt the pang of isolation. Friends who had once been close now treated her with cautious awe. Staff who respected her work sometimes hesitated in her presence, unsure how to act around someone who had suddenly become the focal point of national attention. A reporter's call came through mid-afternoon. "Dr. Monroe, can you comment on whether you plan to take legal action beyond the hospital review?" Aisha's fingers tightened on the receiver. "All actions we take will follow protocol and uphold the law," she said, voice calm, deliberate. "We are not acting for spectacle. We are acting for justice and accountability." After the call, she leaned back, letting the weight of her body sink into the chair. The ER buzzed outside, life and death in motion, and she felt the stark contrast. Her world of control inside her hospitals versus the uncontrollable currents of media, bureaucracy, and public perception. Carla returned, handing her a mug of coffee. "You need a break," she said softly. "I don't have one," Aisha said, though she accepted the coffee. "Breaks are for when the system is right. This system still needs me awake, alert, and decisive. And sometimes that means sacrificing comfort, quiet, and ease. That's the cost of being right." Hours later, she reviewed staff statements and patient logs. Every detail mattered, every interaction meticulously documented. The legal team had begun drafting formal complaints against Officer Price, but Aisha focused on ensuring that staff voices were included, that the truth of the ER environment, its pressure, its risks, its courage, was represented fully. A young nurse approached hesitantly. "Dr. Monroe, I thank you for showing that standing up matters, even when it's exhausting." Aisha smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and pride in her eyes. Exhausting is part of it. Fighting for justice is rarely comfortable, but it matters, and that's why we do it. As night fell, the hospital quieted. Monitors hummed steadily. Emergency cases dwindled, and the glow of city lights filtered through the windows. Aisha walked slowly through the empty hallways, reflecting on the day, the exposure, the legal wins, and the emotional toll. Being right hadn't been enough. Being right had come with sleepless hours, scrutiny, and doubt cast even from allies. But she had acted. She had protected staff, patients, and the integrity of the hospital. And yet, she knew that the cost wasn't over. It would echo in staff whispers, in board meetings, in media coverage, and in her own body for weeks to come. The price of accountability was emotional, relentless, and unavoidable. Still, as she returned to her office, she whispered to herself, "I will endure this. I will stand. I will protect the people who cannot defend themselves. And I will not let fear or exhaustion dilute the truth, because the battle for justice didn't end with exposure. The battle was ongoing, and Aisha Monroe weary but unbroken, was ready for it. Morning light spilled to the large windows of Mercygate Hospital, catching the polished floors and reflecting off the monitors. The ER buzzed with routine energy, but something had shifted. A subtle change in the air, in the way staff moved, spoke, and held themselves. A collective confidence born of justice finally finding its footing. Aisha strode down the main corridor, her steps purposeful. The board's formal letters had come through overnight. Officer Price's suspension had been extended, an internal investigation launched, and legal channels activated. The public coverage had shifted from shock to accountability, framing the hospital as a model for transparency rather than chaos. Carla fell into step. Beside her, Dr. Monroe, staff are talking. They feel safer, more supported. They know they can speak up without fear. Aisha nodded, allowing herself a faint smile. That's the point. Safety, transparency, trust. Everything we built must protect patients and staff, not authority misused. Near the trauma bay, Tyler approached nervously. Doctor, the junior nurses wanted to thank you for standing up for, well, everything. Aisha glanced down at him. They're doing what's right by speaking up. I just made sure the system could hear them. That's the work, not the credit. In the boardroom, she met with administrators, legal counsel, and compliance officers. The mood was cautious but respectful, different from weeks ago, when hesitation and fear had clouded every conversation. Now, accountability and clarity. Dr. Monroe, Kevin said quietly, the investigation is moving quickly. Officer Price's pattern of behavior is being reviewed across departments and hospitals. Legal consequences are likely. Good, Aisha said. We can't erase his actions, but we can prevent them from repeating. The board chair, once tense and hesitant, spoke up. Dr. Monroe, your leadership in this has been remarkable. The hospital, staff, and public trust are stronger for it. Aisha's gaze softened, but her posture remained firm. Thank you, but this isn't about me. It's about ensuring that our patients and staff are protected, and that accountability is real, not symbolic. Later, in the staff lounge, Aisha gathered a small group of nurses, techs, and residents. This is not the end, she said. Exposure and accountability are steps. The real work is in our everyday actions, checking each other, supporting each other, speaking up when something is wrong. Change is a practice, not a moment. Carla nodded. And the staff, they're more confident now. Good, Aisha said. Confidence is essential, but it's not enough. Responsibility accompanies it. Protect your patients, your colleagues, and your own integrity. That's the core of this hospital. News outlets had begun calling for interviews again. Aisha addressed them with calm precision. This hospital has faced a challenge that reflects systemic issues beyond our walls. Our response is procedural, factual, and guided by patient welfare. Misconduct will not be tolerated. Authority is never above accountability. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and the coverage shifted from outrage to recognition. Officer Price's suspension, the ongoing investigation, and the staff statements framed him as the central figure of misconduct. For the first time, his power seemed diminished, contained by law, policy, and public scrutiny. Later in the day, Aisha visited the pediatric wing, checking on young patients. A small girl, recovering from surgery, reached for her hand. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. Aisha squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe. That's what matters." As she walked the hallways, she reflected on the battles fought, the humiliation, the viral footage, the bureaucratic pushback, the internal review, and the media exposure. Each had been a storm, testing her resolve. Each had exacted a cost, fatigue, scrutiny, and moments of doubt. But the result was tangible. Protection for staff, accountability for abuse, and a hospital culture shifting toward justice. Carla approached with a small folder. Dr. Monroe, there are proposals for new protocols, training programs, and reporting structures. They'd ensure no staff member is ever in the position you were yesterday. Aisha opened the folder, scanning the plans. Her eyes softened at the level of detail, the foresight, the recognition of staff voices. "Implement them," she said, "every step of the way. This isn't symbolic. This is change at last." By evening, she's still alone on the observation deck, looking out at the city lights. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving streets glistening like black glass. The hum of traffic and distant sirens felt distant here, a quiet backdrop to the weight of the day. She thought of Officer Price, of the viral footage, of every microaggression she had endured, and of the systemic pattern she had fought against. The storm had passed, but the ripple remained. Public exposure had forced consequences, yet she knew the work of vigilance and protection would never truly end. Her phone buzzed, a message from Kevin. "Investigation update. Officer Price formally terminated. Legal review complete. Staff morale improving. Media narrative positive." Aisha exhaled slowly. Relief washed over her, but it was measured. She had won a battle, not the war. Yet, seeing the staff moving with renewed confidence, patients receiving care without interference, and the hospital functioning as it should, she allowed herself a small, rare smile. Walking back through the ER, she noticed a young resident struggling with a procedure. She stepped in, gently correcting his hand placement, offering guidance. "Good work," she said. "Mistakes happen. Learn from them." It was a reminder. Leadership wasn't about headlines or viral videos. It was about presence, guidance, and the quiet, relentless work of protecting lives every day. Later, she paused in the main hallway, listening to monitors, the shuffle of shoes, the low hum of voices. The hospital felt alive, purposeful, and safe. A system built from care, respect, and vigilance had endured its test. Carla approached, smiling softly. "You did it. You protected the system, the staff, and the patients." And Officer Price gone. The truth prevailed. Aisha shook her head slightly. "It's not about me. It's about protecting what matters. Justice, accountability, and care. That's the measure." She returned to her office, letting herself finally sit. Exhaustion pressed on her, but satisfaction, quiet and deep, pressed back. The cost of standing up, of being right, had been high, but it had been necessary. Lives had been protected. Staff voices had been amplified, and systemic abuse had been held accountable. She looked at the framed photograph on her desk. The first clinic she'd opened years ago, small and modest, yet full of hope. The journey had been long, painful, and at times isolating, but the empire of care she had built now had the power to withstand prejudice, bias, and misuse of authority. The city lights glimmered outside her window. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. "We endured, we stood, we protected, and we will continue to do so." Because leadership, she knew, wasn't about power. It was about responsibility, resilience, and the courage to act when injustice threatened the vulnerable. And for Aisha Monroe, doctor, CEO, and guardian of Mercygate, that responsibility was unyielding, lifelong, and worth every cost. The hospital had settled into a rhythm again, but it was quieter, different, like a place that had endured a storm and emerged stronger, though scarred. Staff moved with more confidence. Protocols were tighter, and patient care felt less encumbered by fear or hesitation. Still, the echoes of the incident lingered in conversations, whispers in the break room, and hesitant glances toward the now empty offices that had once housed bureaucratic hesitation. Aisha walked through the main ER corridor, clipboard in hand, scanning monitors, checking on patients. The hospital had begun implementing the reforms she had demanded. Clearer reporting procedures, mandatory bias training, and a strengthened internal review system. Every measure was intended to prevent another Officer Price, another abuse of authority, another moment where staff or patients were silenced. Carla approached, a folder tucked under her arm. "Dr. Monroe, the staff survey just came back. Confidence is up, morale is higher, and there's unanimous support for the new reporting protocols. They trust that leadership will protect them." Aisha nodded, absorbing the news. "Good, but trust is fragile. It's earned every day, not once in a viral moment." A young nurse, Rosa, approached hesitantly, eyes downcast. "Dr. Monroe, I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for us, for patience, for everything. I've never felt more safe at work. Aisha smiled faintly. You didn't need me to save you. You were already doing your job. I just made sure the system protected you while you did it. Across the hospital, a quiet storm had taken shape in Officer Price's absence. Legal counsel had recommended termination. Internal investigations were proceeding, and his reputation had taken a significant blow. The viral footage, once a source of public outrage, now acted as evidence of accountability. Staff members who had feared retaliation now spoke freely, documenting incidents, supporting colleagues, and participating actively in shaping hospital policy. Aisha paused in the hallway, leaning against the cool wall. She reflected on the personal cost she had paid. Endless hours of scrutiny, media pressure, board tension, and emotional exhaustion. Every step had demanded vigilance, precision, and composure. She had been right. But being right had exacted a price. Kevin appeared, quietly slipping into the space beside her. Dr. Monroe, you've done what most leaders wouldn't. But I need to warn you, there's still chatter outside the hospital. Some media outlets are questioning motives, the optics, even your approach. Public perception isn't always kind. She looked at him, eyes sharp. I don't control perception. I control action. The rest is noise. And the action we've taken here, it protects staff and patients. That's what matters. Carla joined them, placing a hand on Aisha's shoulder. People are finally speaking up. They're not afraid anymore. That's huge. It is, Aisha admitted softly, and it's exactly what we fought for. Later that evening, the hospital hosted a small gathering in the main conference room. Staff, administrators, and select board members came together not for applause, but for acknowledgement. Aisha addressed the room, her voice calm but resolute. We've endured an extraordinary challenge in the past weeks, she began. An officer misused authority, bias threatened patient care, and fear silenced some voices. But through courage, transparency, and accountability, we've taken action. Policies are updated, staff are protected, and justice is underway. This is not a celebration. It is recognition of responsibility. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Young nurses exchanged relieved smiles. Residents nodded, and administrators, once hesitant, met her gaze with respect. A staff member whispered to a colleague, "It's different now. We can actually speak without fear." Aisha's gaze swept across the room. That's the goal. No one should ever feel powerless in this hospital. Authority must be accountable. Bias must be addressed. Staff, patients, and truth are our priority, always. Outside, the sun dipped behind the city skyline, reflecting gold and crimson across the hospital windows. The day had been long, filled with tension and decisions that weighed heavily on her shoulders. But the hospital itself seemed steadier, as if it had absorbed the storm and now moved with deliberate purpose. Later, in her office, Aisha reviewed patient charts, staff reports, and compliance documents. Her phone buzzed sporadically. Calls from legal, board members, and the press, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the work that mattered. She knew Officer Price's termination and ongoing legal proceedings were only part of the picture. Lasting change required vigilance, reform, and consistent leadership. Kevin approached once more, concern in his eyes. "Dr. Monroe, you've done all this, but the cost, it's high. Are you okay?" Aisha looked up, her expression firm but reflective. "Being right isn't always easy," she admitted. "It comes with scrutiny, stress, and emotional burden. But the lives we protect, the system we safeguard, it's worth it. That's the measure." Carla entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. "You should rest. Even leaders need breaks." Aisha allowed herself a small, rare smile. Rest will come. But the work, it never stops. And that's okay. It shouldn't. As night fell, she stepped out onto the observation deck. The city lights shimmered below, reflections of rain-soaked streets and quiet resilience. The storm had passed, leaving a hospital strengthened by accountability, staff emboldened by truth, and a leader who had endured personal costs to protect the vulnerable. Her thoughts drifted to the systemic patterns she had fought against, the subtle forms of bias, the microaggressions, the fear of reprisal. Exposure and termination of Officer Price were victories, But the real achievement was cultural. A hospital that could withstand injustice, a staff empowered to act, and a system now aligned with care, accountability, and transparency. A text message from Kevin appeared on her phone. Officer Price's final termination letter received. Board and legal fully aligned. Staff morale improving. Media coverage stabilizing. She exhaled, the weight of months of tension slowly lifting. Yet even in relief, she understood the responsibility was ongoing. Systems were fragile. Trust was delicate. Leadership demanded vigilance, courage, and consistency. Aisha looked out across the city, whispering softly, more to herself than anyone else. We endured. We stood. We protected. And we will continue to do so. The hospital lights glimmer behind her, reflections of vigilance, courage, and resilience. Doors that had once felt closed, doors of transparency, safety, and accountability, were now open. Staff moved through them freely, empowered by the knowledge that justice, though delayed, had arrived. And Aisha Monroe, doctor, CEO, and guardian of Mercygate, walked those hallways with quiet strength, knowing that the fight against bias and abuse was never over, but that she, her staff, and her hospitals were ready. Because leadership, she reminded herself, was not about control or recognition. It was about responsibility, protection, and unwavering commitment to truth. And in that, she had succeeded.